Welcome, everyone, to this fireside chat with John Hennessy. I'm JP Singh. I'm a 30-year professor of computer science at Princeton, and also an entrepreneur building tech companies, and I run a center at Princeton in blockchains. I'm not going to discuss John's accomplishments here today, which makes him happy. It would just take too long, and we have medal presentations to do. But as you know, he's a Turing Award laureate, former president of Stanford University for 16 years, this obscure little university that we're sitting in right now. He is the chairman of the board of Alphabet, the parent company of Google, and I'm proud to say he's a member of the board director of a company that I co-founded. And as he's less proud to say, he's my PhD advisor as well. And to the topic of today, for the last few years, John has started and has been running an amazing global leadership program at Stanford called the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. So our focus in today's conversation is going to be mostly on leadership and anything else that John wants to talk about. I'll just say on a personal note, I think the reason Kai asked me to do this fireside chat with John is that I've had what I can only describe as the honor, the privilege, and the extraordinary good fortune of knowing John now for 37 years. Ever since I started as his graduate student in the late 80s at Stanford, John has been instrumental to not just my career, but also to my orientation, my outlook on things. And he's continued throughout to be a mentor, a guide, and a friend. Today we're talking about leadership. John will have a lot to say about that, but I'll also say that separately from the things he has written about and talked about, I've learned a lot about leadership and mentorship from just being around John. And I'll try to bring some of those things into our discussion as well, because I know that many, many others like me have also benefited tremendously from his mentoring and his views on leadership. So for that, John, in front of these amazing, about 1,200 people, I'll try to speak louder because the mic is coming up. 1,200 people, I think, that Kai and Yi and others have brought together today. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
Okay, John, so in one of those many times in your life when you've had very little to do, you wrote a book called Leading Matters, which is a really important book, I think. And in it, you discuss a number of the elements of leadership that are really important to you. A lot of people talk about characteristics of leadership like conviction, vision, confidence, charisma. These are considered characteristics of leadership. John talks about leadership as humility, authenticity, trust, empathy, thank you, courage, collaboration, innovation, and storytelling. So a number of different dimensions than you often hear about what makes a great leader. But John, you also emphasize very strongly the idea of leadership as service. And so what I want to do is ask you if you could elaborate a little bit on that element of leadership, maybe with some examples for our audience.
Sure, JP, happy to do it. I think of leadership as service because I think of a leader of an organization or a team as really helping that organization, that team, achieve success. After all, if we're all in this together and the leader and the team can succeed, then the entire organization is successful. I used to say sometimes, think of the university as an upside-down pyramid, and the president's at the apex, the bottom of that pyramid, but he's supporting, or she's supporting, the entire organization to be successful. And certainly in a university especially, where your success really is the success of the individual faculty and students, your job as a leader is to help empower them to be successful. So you're serving and trying to create an environment where they can be successful. Just as when I was leading a research group, my goal was to make the students in that research group really successful in their research. And that way we, the entire team, would be successful.
So something I remember from back in the research days that really stood out about you to me, and I've been talking, without your knowing this, I've been talking with people over the years about this, that in academia, surprisingly to me, credit, people care a lot about credit and their personal credit. It's the currency, right? Money is not the currency, credit is the currency. And so you would find that people stuck to credit and tried to keep credit stick to them. What I noticed about you even back then was you would give credit. You built a group with junior faculty and students, and you would go around giving talks, and you would give credit liberally and freely, overly so, to other people. And I think it felt to me like you understood that by doing that, you get those people to be more vigorous, more engaged, more excited, and it really does the best things for the benefit of the overall enterprise that you're part of. And I think you understood, I'm not sure about this, but I think you realized that in the end, that credit comes back to you as well for building a successful enterprise. So could you speak to that element a little bit?
Sure, JP. I mean, I think when you're working with a team, students and other faculty members, do you want to be the person that casts the long shadow so that you appear to be the secret to the success? Or do you want to be seen as the person who helps organize and achieve success for the entire group? I want to be seen as the latter. I want the entire group to be successful, and I want the individuals to strive for that kind of success as well. If they are constantly in the shadow, if they're constantly subordinate to me, then we're going to lose that drive and that independence and the willingness to be creative, to be innovative, to suggest incredible ideas. I mean, when I look at the work I've done over my 40-plus years as a computer scientist, most of the really interesting, I helped take those interesting ideas and cultivate them and get them to grow. But most of the interesting ideas came from younger people who kind of suggested something. Let's try something, see if this works, right? Let's brainstorm. And if you want an environment that's really creative, that where brainstorming works, then you better make sure that people feel like they'll get credit, like they can participate, like they can throw in crazy ideas and try out different things.
So the flip side of this is ego. Where does ego fit into this for you as a leader?
Yeah, certainly people want to be recognized over the long term for their contributions. And there's certainly, seeing that is important, and having the recognition of your colleagues is important. On the other hand, I never want to be the person that says the success is all due to me. And certainly, if you're going to run a large organization, you better not act like that, because if you act like that, you will have an organization which is dispirited and not functional.
Okay, so speaking of different sizes of organizations, you have led a research group, an engineering school, a university, you're chairman of the board of a huge company like Alphabet, you've built startups. Can you talk a little bit about the differences or similarities? At some level, it feels very different to lead a startup company versus a major university. Could you speak to some of the lessons, differences, similarities of those different types of organizations?
Sure. I mean, I think they are different in that the constituencies you're serving are very different. A university has a very complex set of constituents. It has the students, it has the faculty, it has the staff of the university, it has the parents who all care a lot about the education that their children are receiving. It has the federal government, it has the state government, it has alumni who all believe, and rightly so, have a stake in the institution. So it's a very distinctive in that sense. Startup company, you've got your employees, you have your customers, and you have your initial investors, right? So it's a relatively, and as the company grows, that broadens out. Today, I mean, Google is a company that touches millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people every single day. So you have a constituency that includes that. And then thinking about how do you ensure success of that organization? You know, when you become president of a university, you have to celebrate the success of others, right? Stanford, one of my colleagues at the medical school or in economics wins a Nobel Prize. That is a great day for a university president. It's not great, you didn't earn the Nobel Prize, but you helped create an environment where somebody could do work that was recognized at the very peak of its profession.
So do you feel like these characteristics that you talk about in your book and you talk about elsewhere are all sort of kind of the same needed characteristics for someone running a startup versus leading a major institution?
You know, leading a startup, I learned a lot from some of the early people I worked with, and that was a willingness of the leadership, particularly in a startup environment, where you're asking people to work extraordinary long hours. The first question is the leader of the organization working those long hours? And in my very first startup, the person we hired as CEO said, we're going to have the executive staff meetings on Saturday mornings because we want people to recognize Saturday as a work day. But then before Saturday meetings that we would have at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock every Saturday morning, he would go out and buy donuts for everybody in the company. And that sent a message about we're all in this together. It's a commitment, we're all in that together. And that's I think, critical for people to understand. And if you're going to be an authentic leader, one who people will believe, when I used to say, when I was president of the university, if I say yes, it means it's a go. If I say no, the answer is no. And if I say maybe, I mean, maybe it is, maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. It doesn't mean it will definitely happen. It doesn't mean it won't definitely happen. But being authentic with that and setting expectations with people that you can be trusted is key.
And what about, related to that, again, what about fairness? I found, again, in watching you over the years, that people may disagree or agree with decisions you make, but I always felt, and I think most people I know always felt, that you were fair. You had thought through it. It was a well-reasoned, thought-out decision. It was not arbitrary, and it was fair. You don't talk much about fairness, but what do you think about fairness in leadership?
Oh, absolutely crucial. I mean, you touched on two of the three factors that, because in leading a larger organization, you are going to make decisions for which some people object. Sometimes that group can be rather significant and noisy. So you need three things. You touched on two of them, right? There has to be a notion that it's a fair decision. There has to be a rationale, which indicates why you did it. And the other is, you've got to ensure that people have adequate input to voice their opinion. It's not a consensus, but it is consultative. And people have to have the feeling that they had the chance to make their case. So even if they don't get the outcome they'd like, they feel like they had input.
And when you look at some of the leaders of the major companies, tech companies, that started from nothing and became huge, perhaps you wouldn't easily associate some of these characteristics with some of those leaders who built those companies? Or do you think they all had these kinds of characteristics?
I think it depends a lot on how people evolve over time. I think, every startup is a unique situation. And it's uniquely cast, and the role of the founder or CEO in that is unique. I mean, one of the problems we've had is we've become in the past 10 years or so, become very infatuated with founder CEOs. Founder CEOs often with no real understanding of how to build a company. And in many cases, I think the problem with that is I'm all in favor of founder CEOs, as long as the founder realizes when it's time to step aside and get a better person as CEO. But that's hard to do because the ego factor overwhelms that decision often.
Okay, switching gears a little bit. There's one question over time, I would say, John, that I've never heard you answer correctly. So what do you think?
He's going to say, which is better, Princeton or Stanford?
Oh, that I've always heard you answer incorrectly. But there's a question that I've never heard you get right. Do you have any idea what it might be?
No, I have no idea.
Okay. It's the what, I've asked you this over the years many times. It's the what's next for you question.
Oh, what's next for me?
And, so you...
retirement and the grave,
No. Okay, I will bet money with people that that's not the right answer. But I wasn't asking actually what's next for you just yet. But I was asking, in the past, you stepped down from the presidency of Stanford.
Yep.
You said you were going to slow down, retire, go back to teaching and being a professor, and that's it. And then you ended up starting this amazing program. The Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, which is a massive undertaking, right, by any stretch. And so it's global, it's all disciplines across the board. It's really, really ambitious. And because you had the title of world's best fundraiser already, you felt the need to go start with $400 million. And then that wasn't enough for you, so you went to $800 million. I don't know if it's gone further up than that. But I'd like to hear something about, I think the audience would love to hear something about, from a leadership perspective, that program.
Yeah.
What led you to start it? How has the vision for it evolved? How do you choose scholars? Things about that program.
So we started it because I started thinking that leadership around the world was failing. It was failing in Washington. It was failing in parts of Europe, right? The refugee crisis. The Arab Spring got off to a great start and then collapsed. We had examples of corporate failure, right? Certainly in the 2008-2009 financial crisis, certainly corporate failure. And even in some cases, people leading universities forgetting what their core mission was and what their ethical guidelines were. It occurred to me, educational institutions should prepare people for this kind of leadership, and we're not doing a very good job. So that was the notion. I had luckily some good friends that believed this was also a problem and were willing to support it. Today we're moving up to 100 students a year. We have 91 students coming in this fall, chosen from about 5,000 applicants around the world. So we look for people, obviously all these people are in Stanford graduate programs, so they have to be exceptional academically to begin with, to get into whatever they're in, whether it's a PhD or an MBA or an MD or JD or whatever. And then we look for people that have some evidence of their leadership potential, which is why it's a graduate program, because at the undergraduate level, it's just too hard. People are too young. But at the graduate level, you can see, and probably most of our applicants have a year or two between their undergraduate program and applying to our program. So they often have some other experience beyond their university years to show us that they are a leader. And we've brought in people who've started nonprofits. We've brought in people who've been in important roles in politics, for example. And the remarkable thing is you've got 91 people in, let's say, in any given year, probably 50 different disciplines. So you've got lawyers working with doctors, working side by side with engineers, with scientists, and it creates a learning environment that's multidisciplinary and really mind expanding. And I think that's one of the most important things we do.
Okay, one of the things with regard to the program is it's global. You have people coming from all over the world. And to me, it feels like an interesting aspect of teaching leadership, or especially if people coming to the US from all over the world, is culture. I came from a different culture to the US when I was for undergrad, and leadership was not on my mind. I was coming to a new culture I knew very little about, and I was here to survive and to learn and to grow, but not leadership. So how do you deal in the program with that cultural element of people coming from other countries, other cultures, to a new culture, and yet you're teaching them to be leaders over a short period of time when they don't even necessarily understand the culture that they're coming into?
Yeah. You know, one of the reasons when we were brainstorming the program, and we started looking at other programs, right? Schwartzman Scholars, for example, or the Gates program, or the Rhodes program. The first thing struck us is, okay, there's one in Beijing and the rest are all in old-time Europe, right? And so I said, well, why not start a program in the most entrepreneurial university in the world? So, and a program that would help get what when we say entrepreneurial thinking, we don't just mean startups. Certainly startups are part of that. But we mean, how are you going to change government to serve people better by rethinking how we do things? How are you going to change and create a new nonprofit that does some incredible social good in the world? So we think a lot about that, and we try to develop people. And people say to us, oh, can you teach leadership? Okay. How many of you could speak when you were born? No hands. How many of you can speak just fine today? Everyone. Right? So you learn speech, you learn language, one of the most human, difficult, one of the most important things. You can learn leadership. It's experiential. You learn by having leadership opportunities and experiences brought to you and get the opportunity to stretch those muscles and learn. Same way you can teach entrepreneurship.
So what have you learned through the program about what you, especially with regard to the global aspect, but in general, with regard to what you thought should work and doesn't really, or what have you learned that works well?
So collaborative projects work really well. Every year we do, scholars across our program come up with things they want to do, they want to work on. They collect other scholars to work on that. We give them a little bit of funding, and they go work on it. And they've worked on all kinds of things, from new technologies to new nonprofits to solving communication problems to all kinds of different things. So that works really well. You're right that there's a lot of cultural barriers, at least initially, that need to be brought down. So in order to do that, everybody goes on retreat. So the fall class goes on retreat a few weeks in, and we program half the time with exercises to ice break and to get people to know one another and share their journey and their stories. Everybody takes a year-long course that we call storytelling, where they get up and they talk about their journey and their experience and share that with the rest of their fellow scholars. And that's a real opportunity to break down those cultural barriers and to understand things.
So maybe related to that question, there are numbers and studies about Asian American faculty at universities. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think in the US, Asian American faculty is about 20%, something like that. People can correct me if I'm wrong. But the number of Asian Americans in university leadership positions at the top levels is about 1 to 2%. So that's a big discrepancy. Do you have thoughts on what this underrepresentation may be due to? And more importantly, what advice would you have for Asian American faculty who would like to take on greater leadership positions at the university?
So leadership is a step-by-step process. You have to experience leadership in the small and then in larger groups, because the problems become more challenging as you head up an organization ladder, right? And the experience I have with trying to get people to jump over rungs on the ladder is mostly negative. Too many great people fail if they're asked to jump over too many rungs. And it's because you're going to be asked to do difficult things. You're going to be asked to say no to people, to deal with difficult situations, to deal with people problems, the really hard ones, right? So I think thinking about how do you take on progressive leadership roles. I mean, I think there's also a question of what do you want to do in your heart of hearts when you come to a university? Look, let's face it. We recruit people who really want to be scholars, who want to do research and teaching, and that's what we recruit them for, and that's the first thing we recognize. Some of those people display appropriate leadership characteristics and may decide they want to do that. The first 2 times I was asked to be a department chair, I said no, because I just felt that my academic career hadn't reached the point where I was going to be comfortable devoting half my time to administrative and leadership roles as opposed to my research and teaching. So I think getting that balance right and deciding when's the right time to pursue that kind of opportunity and being given the right opportunity. It's also up to the leadership of the institution to provide those opportunities, to ask people to step forward and to realize that a diversified leadership team is going to be the best for the organization in the long run.
Okay. Do you find that with regard to culture in general, storytelling is one of the elements that you talk about for leadership? Do you find that to be very different across people coming from domestic or international, or not really?
You know, I mean, it's kind of a universal skill used in a variety of different ways, but in so many times, you've got to be able to. What do you have to do? You have to get the team on board. How are you going to get them on board? You're going to spin a story, a vision of where you want them to go and why, if we can all get together and go to this new place together, which is going to take a lot of hard work, but it's going to be really transformative. And that's the kind of vision you're trying to create.
Okay. Could you speak a little bit, just zooming out a little bit, could you speak a little to how your own views on leadership have evolved over time as you've taken on greater and greater scope of leadership in your career? Are there ways you can identify that I used to think X and then I realized Y, or?
Yeah, I mean, I used to think, I used to think that, I don't know. You know, what I discovered along the way, having met, for example, a lot of leaders in different places, most of them care very passionately about the organization they're leading, whether that's President of the United States or whether it's a university president or a CEO of a company. They care passionately about that organization, and they want to do the very best job that they can. The thing that's different among people is the extent to which they feel the need to get the support and agreement, and they're difficult. How can they deal with those difficult situations? You know, when we went through the financial crisis, the provost and I made a decision that we needed to cut the budget of the university because we lost $7 billion of endowment value in that financial crisis. There was no way we couldn't. And lots of people thought, you know, no, we should just keep spending money and spend down the endowment over time, and that's what it's for, and we shouldn't make a change. And we said, if we don't do that, we're going to be cutting budgets for 6 or 7 years. And having gone through the experience of having to do a layoff in my first startup, I realized that if you're going to have to do something difficult, get it done, and get it done as quickly and as humanely as possible. And so we proposed something, but lots of my colleagues thought, oh, you're being too harsh, you're being too difficult. I think in retrospect, it was the right decision, but it was a hard decision to get everybody on board with.
Yeah, that sounds really, really challenging. Yeah. And I'll get to something like that just after this question, but when you look at the young people coming into the program as potential leaders, do you see major differences in how you see this younger generation as potential leaders versus the kinds of leaders that you read about, you encountered, you were inspired by when you were a young person? Are you seeing systematic changes in how leadership and people's views to leadership is progressing? You
know, I think with respect to leadership, I think, first of all, there are a group of young people who really are concerned about the future of human society, the planet we live in, and the future. If I asked our scholars what's the biggest problem we should worry about, I think climate change would come to the top of that list, and after that would come a whole variety of other related social issues. The interesting thing is, I think they're willing to think quite broadly about how the problems get attacked, whether it's through for-profits, whether it's through nonprofits, whether it's through governmental. So they're willing to think broadly about how to approach that problem, which I think is particularly healthy. They don't think it's necessarily going to be solved by one anchor tenant, right? Which in an earlier generation, I think people believed in many cases government would be the solution provider. And I think today people believe a multifaceted approach is much more valuable.
Okay. So I was going to come back to the what's next question and say that what's next for you is presidential candidate.
No. We just selected a new presidential candidate. And I'm too young to run against one of those guys.
But speaking of that kind of situation, university leaders in particular, and corporate leaders, have had seems to me, a very difficult last few years. A lot of very divisive issues, as well as a major health crisis, right? It seems like a difficult time to be the leader of a university or of a large organization, whether a nonprofit or even a corporation. Let's stick to universities. Do you have any advice based on your experience for people holding senior leadership positions in universities in these times? Am I even right?
Yeah, no, I think it's been extremely difficult. I think in terms of university leadership, probably the most difficult time since the Vietnam War era. And what was particularly, we had lots of student protests when I was president, 16 years, hunger strikes, my office got occupied, all kinds of things that happened. But we didn't have one thing that has characterized at least the crisis around Gaza and the war, which is students against students. And that is really difficult. I think the universities also became, in the whole aftermath of the George Floyd murder and everything that went on, they became, felt like they needed to take public positions on important issues. And I think that was not sticking to your knitting. It's drifting away from core mission. Core mission, we used to say, Stanford will take a public position if it directly affects our research, our teaching, our students. Those are the things we really focus on. So, for example, I was a big proponent of the DREAM Act, and I worked hard on trying to get the DREAM Act through Washington because I thought that was important. I've been a big proponent of immigration reform because I think that was really important. We didn't make the progress I hoped we would have made. But on other issues, we're drifting away from core mission once we start taking public positions on those. And I think that's one of the things that we need to stick back to our knitting. Somebody wrote a great op-ed in the New York Times. They said, the right to remain silent is one that universities should take advantage of more often. And I think that's really, really probably good advice.
Okay. Thanks, John. I think we're running out of time for question and answer. So I just want to end on a note of saying that with regard to leadership in a different way at a personal level, which I think is also really important, I just want to say about what I found about John and about you, John, is over time is whenever I have a very difficult situation that I'm confronting, John is the person I go to. And why do I keep doing that? It is a leadership issue. I think there are a few things that I found really amazing as a super busy person. One, you're there, you're available to talk. You'll think through the issue regardless of how busy you are. You won't just say stuff, you'll think through it. You'll never tell me just what I want to hear. You'll always tell me what you really believe, which I think is not easy and is incredibly valuable. And you don't tell me what to do. You tell me, here are the trade-offs, here's what I see it, and you get to the heart of the matter in what the actual issue is. I think even just from a leadership perspective, those are incredibly important traits. And I want to thank you personally for bringing those to me and to my life. And on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you very much for talking with us about leadership today.
Great. Thank you, JP. Thank you. Thanks.